Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
We're learning Mishna Yevamos, Parak Ches, Chapter 8, Mishna Daled, Mishna 4. Now, in previous Mishnah, yes, we had discussed the men who had damage to their organ in a way that they weren't able to have children. And the damage could be in the testicles, it could be in the member. And regarding the prohibition of such a person marrying into the kahal, into the congregation, there was a distinction between someone who became that way due to an outer source, like some kind of an outside damage, or if they were born that way or due to illness. The prohibition to marry was only if they were damaged from some kind of outside source, but if it was because of an illness or they were born that way, there was no prohibition. Now, the discussion of this Mishnah is going to be about Yibum, about if, let's say, a person passes away without children, and he was sterile. This person was sterile, meaning he was married permissibly, and let's keep it simple. Any of these men that we mentioned before can marry a convert. So let's say he was married to a convert, then he died without children. Right? So is there a mitzvah of Yibum now? That this man who died without children, he couldn't have children. What's the halach about his wife? What about if the situation is where a person who could have children died without children, and his brother, who would be doing Yibum, is sterile? Does he do Yibum or not? So that's what this Mishnah is going to be about. So Mishnah Daled begins. Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua said, Shamati sha'asaris chayletz v'chaltzin le'ishtay. I have heard that a saris is the word used for a person who is sterile, can't have children. I have heard that a sterile person performs chalitza. Performance chalitza means that when his sister-in-law falls to him for Yibum, there is a Yibum bond, and he has to do a chalitza to free her. V'chaltzin le'ishtay. And I also heard that if a sterile man died without children, that his wife who falls to Yibum, to the brothers, chalitza will be done to her, which means, again, she has a Yibum bond to her brother-in-law, and if she's going to go free, you got to give her chalitza. Okay, so I heard that a saris, this sterile person, performs chalitza is done with his wife, v'asaris lo chayletz v'lo chaltzin le'ishtay. But I also heard that a sterile person does not do chalitza, which means if his sister-in-law falls to him for Yibum, he won't do anything, she'll be free to go. Nor do we do a chalitza to the wife of a sterile person. All right, so I heard yes, and I heard no. Ve'eli lafarish, but I don't know how to explain it. I've heard this. I've heard these contradictory teachings, but I don't know what to do with it. Okay, now, Rabbi Akiva, the sage Rabbi Akiva said, Ani afarish, I'll explain it to you. Saris Adam, a person who became sterile because of another person. That means it was due to injury. Whether it's a person, it was an animal, whatever it could have been. But the point of Saris Adam, which really means sterile by man, means that it became sterile from an outside injury. In that situation, we say such a person, chayletz, he will do chalitza. The mitzvah of Yibum will apply to him as a brother whose sister-in-law fell to him for Yibum. V'chaltzin le'ishtay, and he was the married man who died without children. Chalitza will be done with his wife. Why? Because at some point in his life, he had a time that he was fit, that it was possible for him to have children. Meaning this person who is a Sris Adam, he became sterile by injury. That means that at some point in time, he was able to have children. And now something happened that says he can't. Well, since at one point of time he could have children, says Rabbi Akiva, that's the person who we say, although now he can't have children, nonetheless, or at some point in time he couldn't have children, nonetheless, the mitzvah of Yibum will apply to him. Saris Chama, but if, let's say, this will remain sterile by the sun, it doesn't mean the sun made him sterile. It means he was sterile from birth. Meaning sterile by the sun means that when he saw the light of day, that means when he was born, he was already sterile. And there are physical signs. The Bartanura cites the Gemara that talks about the physical signs of such a person, that it's recognizable that from birth he is sterile. Sris Chama, so the Sris who's been sterile from the time he was born, he will not perform chalitza, nor will chalitza be done to his wife, to his wife. Right? That means if his sister-in-law falls to him, no chalitza from him. And if he's the only brother, she's free. And if, let's say, this Sris Chama, he died without children, no chalitza need to be done to his wife by his brothers. Why? Because he never had a time that he was fit to be able to have children. Now, let's go back to something that maybe we should have explained beforehand. What is the whole discussion here about this sterile person regarding Yibum? Why should he have Yibum? Why shouldn't there be Yibum? And the answer is pretty simple. And the answer is because if we're talking about a person who cannot have children, he's sterile, can't have children. The Torah says that what is the purpose of Yibum? The purpose of Yibum is lahakim shem la'achiv, to preserve his brother's name by having children with his wife. Well, if this brother is sterile and he can't have children, then there's no point of Yibum. What the Torah says is meant to be accomplished by Yibum will not be accomplished by him. Or he's not the kind of person, let's put it that way, that this can be accomplished with. So therefore, there's no Yibum connection whatsoever. She won't even need chalitza. She's scot-free. The same thing if, let's say, the man who was married was the one who was childless. So the Torah there says that a person who's childless, his brother should marry his wife to establish a name for him, so that his name, to make sure that his name is to keep the name of the dead from being erased from Israel. His name shall not be erased from Israel. Okay? But if this person who was childless anyway, his name, so to speak, was immediately erased because he couldn't perpetuate his name anyway. And therefore, the sterile person who was married, there's no point of Yibum to his wife. All right, but the whole problem was, Rabbi Yeshua said, but I have a tradition that there is such a person that Yibum does apply to. So when is it? So Rabbi Kiva said, it depends like this. If this is a sterile person who at one point in his life wasn't sterile, then we say, okay, he may now not be able to establish a name for his brother, but he was the kind of person who could have. And therefore, the mitzvah of Yibum does apply by him. And therefore, if he is the brother of the deceased man, so at the end of the day, he's going to at least give her chalitza. He's sterile, he's going to at least give her chalitza. Because he wasn't sterile at one point of time. The mitzvah of Yibum does apply to him. She's connected to him for Yibum. So he's got to at least do chalitza. Is he going to be able to go ahead and do Yibum? Well, if he's sterile, depending on why he's sterile, how he became sterile, that decides whether he can marry the woman or not. Because if she's not a giyaris, if she has a regular, kosher lineage, and he is sterile because of damage, he can't marry her. All right, so he can't perform Yibum, but at least do chalitza. And if, let's say, she is a giyaris, she's a convert, that's who fell from his brother, and that which is a woman he could marry, then he could do Yibum on her. He can do the act of Yibum, the act of cohabitation, even though no children will come from it. Now, and the same thing regarding the man who, let's say, he was a sterile person who died. If at one point of time he wasn't sterile, it means at one point of time he could establish a name for himself by having children, then the mitzvah of Yibum still applies to him, and if he dies, his wife will fall to Yibum to his brothers, and as we'll see later on in the Mishnah, they can even do Yibum on her, because if they're not sterile, what's the problem? They can just go and do Yibum. The issue in the case we're talking about now is if the husband, the man who died, was sterile, but his brothers aren't. So if we say that if at one point of time he wasn't sterile, the mitzvah of Yibum applies to his wife, then when he dies without children, the wife will fall to his brothers, and his brothers can decide what they want to do, Yibum or Chalitza. That's the first opinion in the Mishnah. That's Rabbi Akiva. That's how he distinguished. Rabbi Eliezer says, Loiki, not so. The person who's born sterile, he does chalitza, and if he were to be the one to die without children, chalitza would be done to his wife. Why? Because this person who was born sterile, there's remedies for it. He can be healed. And if he can be healed, then he's the kind of person who can have children. He's considered the kind of person who could establish a name for his brother. And if he's the one who died, he could have children. He could establish a name for himself. It even has to be done to his wife. But if he is sterile because of man, meaning he is sterile because of an outside source, then there's no chalitza. He cannot do chalitza, nor would chalitza be done to his wife. Why? No way to heal that. Any kind of outside cause of it, there's no way to heal it. That means that he can't have children anymore, and therefore he wouldn't have the mitzvah bibam upon him in any way, nor would there be a mitzvah on his wife in any way. So that's the argument between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Eliezer. Hayed Rabbi Yeshua ben Beseira, the sage Rabbi Yeshua the son of Beseira, testified. Al ben Megusas, a person who was known as Ben Megusas, the son of Megusas. Sheb Yerushalayim Sris Adam. He lived in Yerushalayim, and he had become sterile by man. That means he was not born sterile. He became sterile afterwards. Ve'yibmu es ishtay, and they did yibam on his wife. L'kayim de Rabbi Akiva. The point of this testimony was to establish the halachas like Rabbi Akiva. Akiva is the one who said that the Sris Adam, the person who at one point of time could have children, but later on some factor caused him not to have children. That is the person who we say the mitzvah even will apply it to him because at one point of time he could have children. That was Rabbi Akiva's opinion. And that's exactly the story that happened here, and therefore we see that the halacha is like Rabbi Akiva. Okay, let's move on. Okay. V'da. The person that it's us to say Lashon Hara about is even if he's an ignorant person. This very ignorant person is also from the nation of God, and his legions who were taken out of Egypt. And if you speak about a Talmid Chacham Lashon Hara, that makes your sin even more severe. And sometimes it's possible when you're speaking Lashon Hara about him that you come under the title, under the status of a person who has publicly shamed a Torah scholar. It is well known from our sages the great punishment that comes for someone who shames a Talmid Chacham. Meaning sometimes you can say Lashon Hara about a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, and it's like, okay, doesn't diminish his status. It just, it's more severe because this is the kind of person who deserves greater honor, and when you lower his honor, you're lowering the honor of Torah. But sometimes you get to the level of mavaza, that you're actually disparaging him. And if you're actually disparaging him, that situation, the sin is even worse. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Rabbi. So
what do you want to know?